One of them was last Friday. I know that there are more coming up. I said, and I believe, that if we can't stop this kind of stuff from happening in the United States, then I don't think we can stop it from happening anywhere around the world. And the president has lost his moral clarity on this issue. We should not, in trying to enforce immigration laws, lose our own humanity in the process. One more issue to address, and that's the episode over the weekend of Senator Merkley from Oregon visiting a detention center in Texas after his staff had apparently given advance notice that the senator wanted to visit the detention center in Brownsville, a detention center that was housing young kids. And Senator Merkley was denied access. Well, I'm drafting legislation now, and I hope I can get the support of my colleagues that will guarantee access to members of Congress to these detention facilities. It's important because they're housing vulnerable people, particularly minors, that members of Congress who are charged with the oversight function of the executive agencies, that we have the ability to inspect these facilities. I understand that there's sometimes concerns about the fact that people need notice, the folks who administer these facilities may need some notice, and I think that that's fair. But there also must be a group of members of Congress, chairmen or chairwomen, for example, ranking members, and perhaps a few others, who should have the ability to make unannounced visits to do inspections. And so that legislation is in the drafting process now. And with that, I'd like to introduce my great colleague from Arizona, Raul Grijalva.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Mr. Crowley, for calling us together and for your leadership on this issue. Over on this day, and my friend, Ms. Napolitano from California that has joined us as well. This week, the Secretary of Homeland Security visited my district. Went to Nogales, Arizona, to look at the wall, take some photo shots, and with Congresswoman McSally, and to talk about border security and how you need to shut down the border, zero tolerance, and it was more of a political show than anything else. I chose not to be part of that, and I couldn't be part of it because I wasn't invited, even though Nogales and that region is in my district. To go over to Nogales, Sonora, cross the border, and meet with and talk to the women and their children and the young people that are there, 13 and under, waiting to ask for asylum at the border, and at the rate of about 3 a day, the 90, maybe 100 people sitting on the sidewalk waiting to be processed, some as long as 9 days. As I talked to them, I realized that what we were doing is using these kids and their moms and tearing them apart as collateral damage in what is essentially the political campaign by this administration and members of Congress to demonize all immigrants, to criminalize everyone even involved in the issue, including children, and in doing so, try to ramp up what they believe to be a political narrative that's going to help them. I doubt it very, very much. The values of this nation isn't about tearing kids apart and making them collateral damage in any political discussion. And as Mr. Castro said so eloquently, this is not us. This is not who we are as a country. These for-profit detention centers, this separation of families, deserve Congress's oversight and merit its oversight. And we are not performing that function. But the sadness I saw, the churches that are helping to bring food and clothing to the people that are waiting in line, hearing their stories, and all they want is that opportunity under the law to present their case and their credible fear in seeking refuge and asylum in this country, and not being given that opportunity. And I think we thought we saw all sinking to the lowest levels by this administration with regards to immigration and the border. This is a new low, a completely new low for this administration, to use children, their families, particularly their moms, as a tool in what essentially is a political debate. It is horrible. It is repugnant to our values. And all the efforts of Mr. Crowley and Mr. Castro and others to try to get Congress not only engaged, but to rectify this situation merit all our support. Tuve la oportunidad esta semana pasada en mi distrito, Nogales, Arizona, donde vino la secretaria de Homeland Security con la congresista McSally, a hacer una promoción sobre la frontera, la seguridad, el muro, etc. Y tuve la oportunidad yo de no participar en eso porque es más un teatro político que realidad, ir a platicar con las mamás y sus niños que estaban esperando pedir refugio en este país, auxilio. Y en esas pláticas, reconociendo que ellos nomás querían la oportunidad de presentar su caso, que es la ley de este país y la ley internacional. Al fin del día, esperando 9 días o más, sin ningún recurso, menos que estar allí esperando en fila por días tras días tras días. Y además de eso, una vez en el país, separar a la madre de sus niños, y es una tragedia y no son los valores de este país. Algo tiene que cambiar. Si la retórica política va a ser en esta campaña los inmigrantes y la frontera, yo pensé que ya va a un nivel más bajo, no había otro nivel más bajo que esta administración podía llegar, pero sí llegaron. Usando niños en una campaña esencialmente política, dándole daños a ellos y a sus familias, para mí es una tragedia y una vergüenza para este país. With that, let me turn it back to Mr. Crowley to introduce Ms. Napolitano.
Let me thank you, Raul Grijalva, for your passion on this issue, as well as Joaquin Castro. Thank you as well. There's no steps that the administration can take to make something that is so inhumane as separating a child from their mother more humane. I don't talk about foster families or anything they may be attempting to do here. The separation of families is in and of itself inhumane. When the mother and father or the family are simply trying to save their children's lives in the first place by asking for refuge here in the United States from violence from their country of origin. It's incredibly sad, as Joaquin Castro points out, that the UN, which is in my backyard in New York City, which has always been the symbol for me of doing the right thing in this world, the focus has never been on the United States like this. It's the United States that's actually our government, this president, President Trump, who is actually committing acts of inhumanity against human beings in our southern border, and it needs to stop immediately. We've been joined by our friend and colleague from California, Grace Napolitano, who's also a mom as well, and she brings some unique experience to this. Grace?
Thank you, Joe. From being a person whose mother was an immigrant and a father born in Texas, it was interesting because my early years, I was expected to carry my birth certificate with me to prove that I was an American citizen. In the years that followed in California, which is the biggest recipient of, other than border states, of immigrants seeking asylum, we are a melting pot in California. We treat our immigrants with respect and have passed laws to protect them. And I think that this administration has gone the wrong way, and mostly political, for the end of being in power. And I think it is wrong to use children and their families. Imagine if you're a mother being torn away from your child and not being able to do anything about it. If you're a father and you're at home in another country and your spouse and your child is trying to find a way to protect that child, being turned down or being made to wait and then trying to figure out whether they're going to prove it or not. It is inhumane, and it is time that we as a nation stood up and said to them, to this administration, get with it. Be compassionate. We are not living up to values that this country stands for, and I think it's time that we made it clear that we will not tolerate any more of this abuse, because it is an abuse towards other people. And they have legitimate claims to violence in their country. So we must be able to act. The fact that they only process a few a day doesn't make sense. Why not put more, instead of putting more guards at the border, put more people to work on those claims to make sure that those people are protected. So let's hopefully that Mr. Castro will have something to deal with the issue in Brownsville, my hometown, that will allow members of Congress to be able to do surprise visits, even if they are private companies. It has to ensure that we are treating people fairly and honestly. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. With that, we'll open it for questions. Yes.
So the president has blamed what he calls Democrat laws, or he phrased it differently on different occasions. And on a White House call, it was hinted, and actually in some cases explicitly said, that the Democrat laws that he's referring to are laws that prohibit indefinite detention of immigrants, the detention of immigrant minors and adults in the same, like a series of laws and sort of in this same sense. Is that on the table to negotiate, ending the separation of families as the president apparently is looking?
I don't think there's any negotiation when it comes to the separation of families. No negotiation. What this administration is doing is inhumane. Taking children from their parents, from their families, from their mothers must stop, and it is not negotiable. It's not what we do. It's not reflective of who we are as a people or as a nation, and it must end. And hiding behind other issues when they're using this to send a message to those who may try to come to this country to seek refuge, to seek asylum, because they face death or rape or torture and extreme violence in their homeland, to stay away. If you do come, we'll separate your children from you. How much more horrific for a parent could that be? Let alone for a child. So no, there's no negotiating here. Stop doing this, is what we're saying.
Just to add to that, it's also clear that, well, first, this president has taken every opportunity to govern by executive order. So the idea that he would now say to Congress, you need to fix a law, which he's incorrect about, but the idea that he would wait for any kind of law to happen is really ridiculous. So he has the power to fix this and to make it right, and he should do that.
We can't get
And also, I know Grace has some comments, but the fact that he won't own up to it is a sign that he's ashamed of it, that he's ashamed of what he's doing, and he should be ashamed of what he's doing, because it's an affront to American values that we're separating these young kids from their parents at the border.
Grace, do you want to?
No, the only thing I want to say is, even if there were proposals to change the law, we can't get a hearing, either in committee or on the floor. And they stop every kind of proposal for immigration because they have the power. And so to blame the Democrats is totally ludicrous.
Was there any response from the Attorney General to your letter?
Not as of yet. We haven't received a response.
And what actions can you take? Aside from...
We can continue to call attention to this, the inhumane treatment of these individuals who are seeking asylum in our nation. Asylum is a very special thing that is granted to individuals, and it's recognized, as Joaquin Castro said, in international law by law-abiding countries, that if someone is facing death or rape or torture or some form of violence or persecution, that they ought to be given some type of a separation and category and be dealt with in an expedited manner, to look into the situation to see whether or not there is merit to that case. And that's what we're asking for. But when individuals come to the United States and ask for asylum, and one of the first things that's done is that their children are separated from them, that only adds further torture, mental torture to them. And that's not what we should be doing as a nation. We should not be doing that. Yes?
What did you make of the president last week calling Pelosi an MS-13 lover? And what do you make of him sort of painting Democrats as high crime party?
It is absolutely so ridiculous to call, whether it's Leader Pelosi or myself or anyone, as pro-crime or for MS-13 is so ludicrous, so over the top, it needs no response. We are all against any individuals in this country who do harm to American citizens, be they citizens or not citizens. And if they are undocumented, if they're here illegally and they're committing illegal acts, they need to be deported. No one argues that point. That's never been a point of argument. The president loves to separate the American people, divide the American people. It needs to end. It really needs to end. It's farcical what he's doing now. And the American people get that. They understand that. And it's that type of rhetoric that divides us further and further. And the American people are onto that. Yes.
Immigration is definitely turning out to be a center point for the midterm elections. Do you think that the Democratic Party has a kind of centered, consistent message on this issue, and what should it be?
Democrats have been consistently talking about the need for comprehensive immigration reform. We continue to do that. We continue to talk about the need to deal with the issue of our dreamers and of the DACA individuals who are been left in limbo right now by this administration. The Democrats have been very clear that when it comes to the issue of asylum seekers, that they should be treated humanely and not have their children ripped apart from them. We're very clear about that. Democrats are able to be empathetic towards the immigrant community. This president, though he should be more empathetic, because his mother was an immigrant, his mother knew hardship where she came from, and when she came here in the 1930s, worked as a domestic servant. He ought to be more empathetic towards those individuals who are now trying to come to this country for a better way of life for themselves and for their families, want to contribute to help make America a greater and greater nation. But he turns a blind eye to them. He turns his back to them. And he uses them as pawns in his political games. He continues to take hostages in order to get his wall built. A wall that is a monumental waste of taxpayer dollars if it's built.
Last question. What are you doing on immigration, on the DACA bill, and are you working with the Republicans to try to get a DACA fix that the president will sign?
Well, it's pretty evident that we're working closely with Republicans to get legislation to the floor. We've been talking about the need to have the Queen of the Hill or the King of the Hill legislation through a motion to discharge that is working its way, working its will. We're just a few signatures shy of getting a motion to discharge and that bill to the floor. And that is incredible. It's entirely bipartisan. We could not get to close to 218. We won't get to 218 without Republican support. So we are desperately trying to work in a bipartisan way to get relief for the DACA recipients in our nation. Thank you.